Hello everyone. In this video, I'll be diving into a topic that has shaped not only feminist thought but our understanding of power itself Black feminism. More specifically, I'll be exploring how Black feminist thinkers confront the historical erasure, misrepresentation, and silencing of Black women, and how they built entirely new ways of imagining freedom, truth, and justice that centers their experiences. I will be looking at one central question. How do Black feminist thinkers reclaim Black women's voices from systems of erasure and redefine liberation by challenging dominant narratives about race, gender, and power? My thesis or the answer to this question is Black feminist thinkers, beginning with Sojourner Truth's radical demands for recognition and extending through Bell Hook's structural critique and Audre Lorde's transformation of anger into power, exposes how racism and sexism function together to silence Black women. By reclaiming erased histories, as seen in Saidiya Hartman's text, refusing the constraints of white feminist discourse, and asserting voice as a political act, Black feminists redefine liberation as intersectional and transformative. I hope to defend this by analyzing the works of these authors, beginning with Saidiya Hartman. To understand why reclaiming Black women's voices is essential, we first have to understand the systems that silence them. One of the most powerful critiques of this appears in Saidiya Hartman's essay, Venus in 2X. Saidiya Hartman's Venus in 2X is a foundation of Black feminist text that interrogates how the historical archive records or fails to record the lives of enslaved Black girls. Hartman looks at how official documents written largely by enslavers reduce Black girls and women into fragments of violence, punishment, and disappearance. She calls this the balance of the archive, meaning that the archive itself is not neutral. It is shaped by the same systems of racism and domination that govern slavery. However, rather than accepting this silence, Hartman experiments with how to tell impossible stories, stories that seek to restore humanity and imagination to those rendered voiceless. Her work is central to Black feminist thought because it shows how reclaiming erased histories becomes a form of resistance. Hartman argues that the archive is not a neutral historical record, it is a product of balance. She writes that the archive becomes, quote, a death sentence, a tomb, a display of the violated body. Page 2. In other words, the only moments in which enslaved Black girls appear in the historical record are the moments when power violated them. And even then, Hartman reminds us we cannot ask who is Venus, because the archive contains only fragments shaped by the balance that transformed enslaved girls into, quote, commodities and corpses. Page 2. This is crucial because the silencing of Black women is not accidental. It is structured, intentional, and embedded in systems that define whose stories count as history. Hartman tries to recover these lies, but she admits the limits the inevitable failure of representing Venus fully. Here she insists that telling these partial, impossible stories matters because they reveal, quote, the afterlife of property, the ongoing state of emergency in which Black life remains in peril, page 13. This is why Black feminist reclamation of voice is not just recovery, it's resistance. Hartman shows that reconstructing silenced histories challenges the foundation of white supremacist and patriarchal historical knowledge itself. This sets the stage for the voices who fought back in real time, beginning with Sojourner Truth. One of the earliest and most radical acts of reclaiming voices comes from Sojourner Truth, speaking at a women's rights convention in 1851. Born enslaved in New York to Dutch slave owners sometime around 1797, gained freedom in 1826. She delivered the speech that would become a foundational moment in Black feminist thought, Ain't I a Woman? There is, however, a complication. Truth never wrote her speech down. The most famous version was edited years later by Frances Dana Gege, a white feminist. Historians prefer the earlier transcription by Marius Robinson, because it reflects Truth's actual voice more closely. But across versions, the message remains unmistakably hers. The critique, the logic, the challenge, none of that can be attributed to anyone else. Truth publicly exposes the intertwined forces of racism and sexism that erase Black women, and she refuses that erasure in real time. One of Truth's central insights is that white womanhood had been framed as the universal standard. She observes that white women are treated with care and delicacy, while Black women are denied even basic respect. She states, quote, nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles, or gives me any best place, and ain't I a woman? This line exposes that the ideals of womanhood, gentleness, fragility, and protection were never extended to black women. Truth forces her audience to confront the contradiction. If she performs the labor of men, bears the hardships of enslavement, and still identifies as a woman, then the category woman has been constructed in a way that excludes her. Her critics anticipate Bell Hook's later argument that white feminist definitions of womanhood never accounted for black women's experiences. Truth continues by highlighting the physical labor and abuse she endured. Quote, I have plucked and planted, and no man could heed me, and ain't I a woman? Her labor was essential to the survival of enslaving economies, yet it was never recognized as evidence of strength or resilience. Instead, it became a justification for denying her the protections granted to white women. By foregrounding her labor, Truth demonstrates that gender cannot be understood without race. The expectations placed on black women were shaped by both. This racism and sexism operated together, not separately, in defining black women's lives. Truth then also responds to claims that women lack the intellect required for rights. She asks, quote, if my cup won't hold but a pint and yours hold a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? Here she reframes debates about intellect not as natural differences, but as questions of fairness. Even if capacities differ an argument, she does not concede justice demands equal opportunity. Her logic exposes the hypocrisy of those who used intellect as an excuse for exclusion, and it aligns with the foundational black feminist assertion that systems of power rely on false hierarchies to justify inequality. Truth addresses religious arguments used to justify keeping women inferior. She counters them with a simple statement. Quote, where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. In this line, Truth challenges patriarchal interpretations of Christianity by reclaiming spiritual authority for women. She places a woman at the center of sacred creation, undermining the religious basis for male dominance. Her argument embodies truth-telling as political resistance. Truth closes her speech by invoking the power of women working together. Quote, if the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down, these women together ought to be able to turn it back. This statement reframes liberation as a collective project, not an individual victory. Truth calls for women to join together in reshaping the world, a vision that anticipates the communal and transformative understanding of freedom found in later black feminist thinkers like Hooks and Lord. She demonstrates that racism and sexism are inseparable forces, jointly shaping black women's experiences. Truth uses voice as a tool of political resistance, asserting her humanity in a space designed to ignore her. She critiques the limitations of white feminism, revealing how narrow its definitions of womanhood truly were. She imagines liberation as a collective transformation, not a reform of existing systems. In doing so, she lays the groundwork for the structural critiques of bell hooks and the emotional power of Audre Lorde. Rather than fitting into black feminist thought, Truth becomes one of the thinkers who invents it. After Sojourner Truth exposed the ways black women were erased from early women's rights spaces, Bell Hooks pushes this critique into the 20th century in her groundbreaking book, Ain't I a Woman? Black Women and Feminism. Her analysis reveals that the silencing of black women did not fade after slavery or Reconstruction. Instead, it reappeared inside the very movements that claimed to fight for freedom. Hooks shows that black women lived at the crossroads of racism and sexism, and that this intersection shaped every part of their political and personal lives. At the beginning of the text, Hooks describes how deeply this silencing ran. She explains that the generations of black women had been taught, quote, to submit, to accept sexual inferiority, and to be silent. Page 2. This line demonstrates that silence was not simply an individual choice or personality trait, but the result of a long history of social conditioning. Black women were raised within systems that relied on their compliance. Their silence served both patriarchy and white supremacy, making it easier for their labor, their voices, and their suffering to be ignored. Hooks then turns to the internal dynamics of the Black liberation movement. She writes that black male activists expected black women, quote, to conform to a sexist role pattern and demanded that they take care of domestic needs and breed warriors for the revolution. Page 5. In this vision of liberation, the fight against racism depended on black women remaining in traditional inferior roles. Racism was positioned as the only true form of oppression, and sexism was dismissed as a distraction. This reveals that the structural problem at the heart of Hooke's argument. Movements fighting for racial freedom still relied on patriarchal expectations. Liberation for black women was always conditional, always secondary. This erasure was not limited to black political spaces. White feminist movements, which claimed to fight for women's equality, also overlooked black women. Hooks notes that white feminists often acknowledged that black women faced both racism and sexism, yet in the same breath they, quote, dramatized the black female experience. Page 6. This meant celebrating black women's resilience while ignoring the pain, violence, and exploitation that produced their so-called strength. Hooks argues that this myth of the strong black woman implies that black women somehow escape the harm of oppression simply by being strong. Instead of confronting the structural forces that hurt black women, this myth reassures white feminists that there was no need for intervention. Because of these patterns, black women were pushed into a political no man's land. Hooks captures this absence in one striking line. Quote, when black people are talked about, the focus tends to be on black men, and when women are talked about, the focus tends to be on white women. Page 7. This sentence describes the dual invisibility at the center of black women's experience. They disappear inside racial discourse and that centers men, and inside feminist discourse that centers whiteness. Their lives fall between categories that were never designed to include them. Hooks also acknowledges the emotional impact of this exclusion. She writes that black women often fail to unite against their marginalization because, quote, sexist racist socialization had effectively brainwashed us to feel that our interests were not worth fighting for. Page 9. This is not an accusation, but a diagnosis of internalized oppression. After generations of being told that their suffering mattered less than men's and less than white women's, many black women came to believe that silence was the only possible position. Their erasure became self-reinforcing. One of Hooke's most important contributions is her insistence that race and gender cannot be separated. She challenges the feminist claim that these are distinct issues by explaining, quote, my life experience had shown me that the two issues were inseparable. My destiny was shaped by being born black and female. Page 12. With this statement, Hooks lays the groundwork for the theory of intersectionality. Her point is clear. Any movement that tries to address racism without sexism or sexism without racism will fail black women entirely. Finally, Hooks emphasizes that the struggle for black women's liberation cannot exist in isolation. She writes that the fight must move beyond the stereotypes and assumptions about black womanhood to reach the truth of their experience, and that this struggle only matters within a movement committed to, quote, the liberation of all people. Page 13. This is the transformative vision at the heart of black feminism. Liberation is not the achievement of individual freedom for a small group. It is the creation of a world where all forms of domination are dismantled. Hooks names the structures that attempted to keep black women silent, and in doing so, she opens a path for a new understanding of freedom, one that is intersectional, communal, and radically transformative. Reclaiming voice is not just symbolic, it's political. Without the voices of black women, liberation movements cannot be universal or complete. If Sojourner Truth reclaimed black women's humanity through public testimony, and bell hooks exposed the structures that silence black women in both black liberation and white feminist movements, Audre Lorde takes the next step. She transforms the emotional consequences of the silencing into political power. Her essay, The Uses of Anger, Women Responding to Racism, argues that anger, especially black women's anger, is not destructive, irrational, or dangerous as society insists. Instead, Lorde frames anger as a tool of clarity, connection, and liberation. Where dominant culture demands that black women remain polite, quiet, or controlled, Lorde insists that their anger is both necessary and revolutionary. Lord begins by naming anger as a natural, honest response to racism. She writes, quote, "My response to racism is anger. I have learned to use it," page 124. This line reframes anger not as a flaw or a loss of control, but as a process of survival, self-knowledge. By acknowledging anger as legitimate, Lord challenges the expectation that black women must suppress pain in order to be acceptable to others. Justice Bell Hooks shows how black women were conditioned into silence. Lord reveals the emotional cost of their silencing and refuses it. Lord argues that responding to racism means responding to all the emotional injuries it creates. She describes it as the anger of, quote, "exclusion, unquestioned privilege, distortions, silence, defensiveness, misnaming, and betrayal." Page 124. Each term names a different mechanism of racism: being ignored, being stereotyped, being denied full representation, being punished for truth-telling, and being expected to make others comfortable. Lord insists that anger is the correct response to these conditions because it exposes what polite conversations hide. Lord explains that her anger is directed at racist attitudes, not at women themselves, and that confronting anger can create growth. Quote, "My anger and your fears are spotlights that can be used for growth, but for corrective surgery, not guilt." Page 124. This line is central. Her insistence on corrective surgery underscores how deep and systemic racism is, so deep that healing requires cutting into the foundation of belief systems, not merely adjusting behavior on the surface. Lord warns against superficial solutions. Quote, "When I speak of change, I mean a basic and radical alteration in the assumptions underlying our lives." Page 127. Black feminist thought does not seek inclusion inside existing systems. It challenges and transforms the foundations of those systems. Lord insists that liberation requires a new worldview, not just better manners or less tension. Lord emphasizes how anger becomes a tool for clarity, action, and alliance building. She offers a striking definition. Quote, "Anger expressed and translated into action is a liberating act of clarification." Page 127. Anger helps identify who stands in solidarity and who benefits from maintaining oppressive systems. It reveals false allies and genuine enemies. It clears confusion and demands accountability. For Lord, anger is not chaotic, it is clarity. Quote, "Black women are expected to use our anger only for others. That time is over." Page 132. Lord frames anger as a tool for redefining the terms on which women live and work together. Instead of being a force of destruction, as racist, sexist stereotypes insist, anger becomes the foundation for building new futures, stone upon heavy stone. Lord insists that Black women's anger is legitimate, informative, and essential. She refuses silence, challenges guilt-based feminism, and demands a radical restructuring of social assumptions. Her work supports the thesis by demonstrating that voice, emotion, and truth-telling are political acts that redefine liberation as transformative collective process. Taken together, these thinkers, Truth, Hooks, Hartman, Lord, from a powerful lineage, they show that silencing Black women is a structure, not an accident. Reclaiming voice is a form of resistance and survival. Liberation must be intersectional and rooted in lived experience. Telling one's story, expressing anger, and critiquing dominant narratives are political acts. So, how do Black feminist thinkers reclaim Black women's voices and redefine liberation? They do it by telling stories that the archive refused, by speaking in spaces built to silence them, by challenging movements that overlooked them, and by transforming anger into a tool for justice. It is not about entering existing systems, not about temporary relief or symbolic inclusion. It is intersectional, communal, and fundamentally transformative, rooted in truth-telling, emotional honesty, and the courage to imagine a world where no one's humanity depends on their silence. What this woman leave behind is not just a body of theory, but a blueprint for freedom. Speak, refuse erasure, transform what tries to contain you. And like truth hooks Lord insists that liberation must include everyone or it cannot be called liberation at all. Thank you for joining me on this, and I hope this exploration inspires you to rethink whose voices you center when you imagine liberation.